Hello my friends, so far we've only had Trumpeter, but recently Foreart has also appeared with two models. I was given the armored version to build for the German model phone magazine. This one is not the specific Ukrainian version which I was asked to build, so it hasn't distinctive teeth in the decals set, but I managed to get them from a fellow modeler. I also added two Eureka XXL jerry cans, antenna sockets by T-rex and resin wheels which are made by the same producer. It's quite enough for this model. Building the model was super easy because the fit of the parts was top notch. I'm not saying this to praise the manufacturer, but it's the truth. See what the parts look like in my open the box video and you will find the link in the description of this video. Before painting and after assembling, the model looks really good. All the accessories are doing their job. The cabin interior is also acceptable, but of course it's missing many elements that could be added if you plan to have the doors or roof hatch open. There's also a driver figure, but I didn't add it to the model because the crew contains of 3 soldiers, so adding just one figure doesn't make sense to me. I started painting by covering all the elements with green primer by VMS. It applies perfectly with an airbrush and the color is very subjective matter, but I used this shade here to show what the producer has to offer. Technically I have no complaints and I will undoubtedly use it again. I forgot to mask the door window and now I need to fix it. This is easily done with clean slate, which is strong enough to dissolve paint but doesn't damage the surface. After a few moments I restored the original condition without any damage. Now I could easily glue the two parts of the cabin together. They fit perfectly and only a few drops of glue were needed to hold everything in place. I applied a black primer to the wheels and then tested the performance of a plastic wheel stencil. If anyone really thinks they can paint rims properly with this crappy plastic, I am very curious how they do it when the size of the cut-out circles changes by 1 mm. I don't recommend it unless the wheel is going to be completely covered in mud and the imperfections won't be visible. Now I started painting with the correct color. I used the Tamiya NATO green. A little backstage shot. For airbrush cleaning I usually use a product by VMS designed for this tool. It dissolves paint residue perfectly and can be diluted with water depending on the size and age of the dirt. I also use it to clean brushes. And now touching up the paint, which was painted with these plastic stencils. Fortunately the wheels have a well-defined rim edge, so the brush rested nicely on it and the paint didn't run too far. Immediately with these elements in hand I started painting the small elements with a lighter shade to create a slightly more 3D effect. For the main painting I started using different shades to create a base look with differences on individual elements. I painted the rocket launchers with a darker color and after removing the masking I started adding a lighter shade to individual elements to build contrast. I did this on all the elements of the model. It was a bit of fiddle, but overall it was worth the extra time spending on surface preparation. A major challenge was brightening the hundreds of rivets on the sides of the launcher. Painting with a single touch wasn't a rational solution, but I managed to achieve a good enough effect by gently rubbing the rivets with a dry brush. I had to be very gentle, and I think I only managed to paint the adjacent surface in 2 places. I was also surprised by the effectiveness of this method in this particular case, but the result is also very good, with all the rivets appearing on the surface after this work much more visible. I painted the larger ones on the cabin using traditional methods, and that's also had a nice effect on the appearance. I know that not everyone likes this method of building contrast and 3-dimensionality, but I think it works well. It's not a complicated task, and the most important thing is to choose the right shade of lighter paint. It shouldn't be too harsh, but if it's too close to the base color, all the work may, but it's not certain, be wasted. You have to experiment to find out which shade will look best on the model. I used this paint set to color all the details. It's not a lot, but I didn't have to do much hand painting on this model. And this is what the model looks like before weathering. Things are starting to get really interesting. First I covered the entire model with a glossy varnish. This is of course a base coat for the wash, but also for applying a few decals I have. They fit quite well, but I needed to work on them a bit. Of course I used VMS decal fluids for this, and it took me about 10 minutes, but in the end the result is exactly what I wanted. The rest of the decals were a piece of cake. I recoated the model, especially the decal areas, with a layer of gloss varnish and set all the elements aside to dry completely before starting the wash. As is standard practice for this part of the modeling process, a dark brown oil wash works best on a dark green. It's debatable whether it's actually a dark green. It would actually be more accurate to call it green, as it's a bit far from dark. Of course, all the excess was cleaned up with white spirit. I also used it to paint delicate lines which dry into perfect streaks, so you don't need to use any additional products to create this effect. This is a trick for those who value their time, and I'm sure my patrons are one of those people. Let the work go on, and I would like to mention my wonderful patrons who support my activity. Massive thanks, guys! My special words of gratitude go to Bulldog09, Christopher Robarski, Dale Etchison, Dan Dubois, Hans Zub, Peter L, Steve Enkin and Karsten Kerry. But the people listed just now are also my great patrons. They all believed in my passion, saw something valuable in it and decided to support me. It's really great when you know that there are a few crazy guys in the world who think like you, want to watch what you build and appreciate the effects of your work. This is really super motivating and gives me the strength to continue working. Please don't forget that you can be one of them. It's very easy because there is a chance to enter this superb group without pay a penny for 7 days free trial. This way you can check whether you like what I publish for my patrons or not. You can surf on my page with no limits, watch and download all superb high-resolution pictures, watch progress shots, check stories with unpublished in other media's models, read the articles, watch the videos with no adverts and enjoy other benefits. Just for free. That's why in each episode I encourage you to support me in my passion. And I realize it's not easy these days, but if you have a few bucks you could drop in my cup, that would be great. Thanks! After analyzing photos from Ukraine, I decided that marking completed missions would be a nice addition. I used the decals I had from building the brawler. They fit perfectly. At this stage I started painting over some scratches. To make them more visible I used a light grey washable paint by VMS. Now a bit of matte varnish to protect all the effects I'd created so far and to tone down the glossy finish that was still on the model. The matte varnish by VMS is one of the best I've used, so this step was really quick and effective. Flipping the model upside down I painted the base coat for road dustiness. Generally all parts on this side should be dusty, so step by step I first tackled the landing gear frame, then the rocket launcher and the crew cabin. Then with a much smaller but still noticeable amount I started applying dust to the upper surfaces. Of course I didn't forget about the wheels, which couldn't have too much contrast. I painted everything with buff paint by Tamiya. This is the perfect color for this effect, even if it's to be a color that will remain without additional pigmentation, but also as a base for applying subsequent layers of weathering. I enhanced the dust effect on the wheels by adding a sandy shade of pigment Jackie, which I diluted with Universal Weathering Carrier. Then I also added a dry pigment, which was also adhered to the surface with the same thinner. Everything was then carefully applied to the surface using a cotton bud and a brush. Simple and effective. I used the same products to apply dirt to other parts of the model. I tried to reduce the amount of dirt with height, meaning the higher the vehicle, the less. This doesn't change the fact that even the roof of the vehicle should have dust, but not to the same extent as the chassis. Once the wheels were completely dry, I whipped off the excess pigment from the tread using my trusty sweaty fingers. Then I wrapped the tread blocks with dark grey paint to give the tires a look of road use. Finally, I applied another light wash of diluted pigment jockey, and after drying, the wheels were ready to be mounted on the model. To set the wheels, I used a hardcover book about the Panzer II tank. CA glue by VMS designed for resin application was the best choice for this task. It's important to remember that wheel alignment is crucial, ensuring none of them are suspended in mid-air. While the model will be placed on a piece of terrain, this inaccuracy can be compensated for by properly shaping the surface, but placing the model on a flat base without any surroundings will absolutely expose this inaccuracy. I continued working on weathering, smearing the model's surfaces with pigments. I mixed it with white spirit to create a thick matte and applied it as a road dust. I painted the greasy stains of grease and oil that leaked onto the dusty surfaces with tint oil paint. This creates nice accents on the spread pigments, drawing the viewer's attention. The amount of paint depends on your needs, and it's best to use varying degrees of thinner. I like the paint to spread on the surface. Of course, I can control this process, and sometimes adding more paint is enough to limit the spread of stains. While simulating splashes of water or gasoline is easiest with a large amount of thinner, painting streaks such as those under the fuel cap requires a thicker paint, which is much easier to control. Until now the windows had been masked with tape, so now it was time to get rid of those pieces and start staining. I glued the prepared masks to the windows and applied small amounts of pigment. As usual, I tried not to overdo it with the staining. Of course, there are photos where the windows are very dirty, but here we have a model that needs to find a balance between replicating the real vehicle and maintaining the good appearance of the miniature. I also applied pigment to the side windows, but I didn't mask the surface. In one of the photos I noticed an interesting effect around the driver's window. I don't know exactly what it is, but I suspect it's some kind of sealant. It's a black hand-painted finish around the window frame. It's not difficult to do and it certainly looks interesting. The original American lettering and markings were painted over with a different shade of green paint. I wanted to achieve this effect from the very beginning. The light shade adds an interesting accent to the door surface and also to the front hood. Finally, just before assembling all the parts, I added pigments to the sides of the cab and the roof of the truck. This completed the weathering. The model looks very nice and I'm happy with the result, as is the collector, who is the lucky owner of this model. Despite the uniform camo and the rather angular and simple silhouette, I managed to achieve interesting effects. Let me know what do you think of this model and the result of my work. And for the end, I'm not pushing, but you know, it would be great to have like, new subscription and some tactical comment containing more than 7 words to fit the YouTube algorithm. So, thanks for watching, that's all for today, see you next time, cheers!